Two.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to a weekly media briefing with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgilla, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. Keisha Davis, our county's health officer, Dr. James Bridgers, the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Acting Deputy Chief of Public Health Services. I believe Christine Hong, Chief Services to End and Prevent Homelessness, is also on this call. Dr. Earl Sauter, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. And last but not least, Richard Dorsey is joining us here as well. But Chris Conklin, the Director of the Department of Transportation for the county. Members of the media, remember to raise your hand during the Q&A portion of this presentation. And with that, good afternoon, Mr. County Executive. How are you?
I'm just lovely. Day 2 of COVID is just really nice. I'm fortunate. I think my case is pretty mild. But if you see me with a Kleenex or sniffling or something like that, I have no choice. I thank everybody for joining me today. After nearly 2 years without a significant snowfall, this week felt like a big change. Overnight Tuesday, many of us saw several inches of snow pile up, impacting our roads, closing our schools, and putting our winter preparations to a test. And for once, it was Montgomery County accumulating more snowfall than most any place else in the capital region. I want to thank the many people across our government who put in days preparing and responding to the storm. We have about 200 crew members and 175 pieces of equipment. And we additionally have 200 contract operators and pieces of equipment that helped us to supplement the clearing effort. Our road crews are the most visible part of our operation, but there are many people coordinating those sand trucks and plows, and they're hard at work as like everybody else is. We also had people from the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue, Montgomery County Police, and our Department of Health and Human Services, working countless hours in assisting those in need. Montgomery County has activated a cold emergency alert to make sure that we're able to, God, you guys did this to me again, to make sure we can get people inside a shelter when they need to be inside of a shelter. So that's really important for us, and we're just glad we're able to get this done. The alert is the highest level of extreme temperature alert that the county ever issues. It brings all of our resources together to work toward the common goal of saving lives and limiting the impact of winter storms. Our folks are out there trying to persuade some of our residents who do not have homes to come inside. And there's a lot of work sometimes to get people to agree to come in and take shelter. Our winter storm information portal is still up, and a great resource for many storm-related questions. And I invite you to visit montgomerycountymd.gov/snow. And I continue to encourage residents to sign up for Alert Montgomery text alerts, which are very important to have for the latest updates on weather conditions, as well as when schools and county facilities may have to close. It's been a busy week for our Department of Transportation and an important week for the future of Montgomery County, with the release of my recommended capital improvements program, the CIP budget, for the fiscal years 2005 to 2030. This proposal calls for a 6-year investment of $5.8 billion, which is a modest 2.3% increase over the previously approved CIP. Money will be spent on many different projects spanning school buildings, libraries, and transportation needs. And we're also ramping up efforts to improve our stormwater system to prevent catastrophic flooding in our community. We are in the midst of a study that's looking at the totality of Montgomery County and where the floods occur and where the stormwater system needs improvements. We're not just looking at the point or the intersection where the water gathers, but everything that leads up to the point of the system failing. And it's beginning to lead us to greater investments in improving a stormwater system that just simply wasn't built to handle storms of the size we're getting today. This proposal also includes an investment in designing and rolling out bus rapid transit system It's going to help relieve congestion on our roads, giving many commuters new, fast, and reliable options for commuting. I've been working on implementing this system in this county since 2008. And you don't need to tell me if I think or ask me if I think the pace is a bit slow. The pace is very slow. There are communities all over this nation implementing similar systems, including down in Richmond. I remember when I started on this path, we were talking to people from Toronto and some of the companies that did the Toronto project. Toronto implemented the bus rapid transit system in 2 years. And here we are, many years later, not able to fully implement a system. If we're going to get serious about expanding public transit in this county, BRT is the most effective and efficient method to provide that transportation, and we can deliver it. BRT is less expensive per mile than anything else we could do. When it's done right, it can be effective, and that's our goal, is to build a system here that's built in a way that it actually provides time benefits to commuters. If we'd been funding this seriously over the past decade, we would have a lot more people connected to public transit by now. This budget includes close to $200 million for affordable housing efforts, with another $50 million coming from our surplus and reserves. The county has far exceeded our budget target and the standards set by the rating agency for reserves. You know, one of the rules, unspoken rules about using reserves is you don't use reserves for ongoing expenses. So the decision to put a lot of this money into affordable housing is, this money is not an ongoing expense, but it's going to help us get through the increasing demand we're seeing for affordable housing now. This is going to allow us to be ready for new projects, since most of the money already budgeted for the coming year has been committed to projects. So without these funds, we'd be very limited in how many new projects we could do. We already know people are lining up to talk to us about projects they'd like to do. This is my third full CIP. We do kind of an off-year CIP in between, and it's 133 million more than the prior approved budget for capital improvements that I presented 2 years ago. One of the biggest disappointments in this process is realizing that we cannot afford all the projects being requested. It's frustrating to see our schools, roads, and communities delayed in their progress because we're hamstrung, because we're constrained by resources due to an antiquated tax structure. It's been this way for as long as I can remember, and I've been talking about this since I was on the council. We have an opportunity this year to make the kind of change at the state level that would move us light years ahead of where we are right now. That can happen by allowing counties across the state to play a bigger role in producing the kind of revenue that's needed to address major improvements. One of the things that happened when the governor announced that there was no $3.5 billion in the transportation funds was, I think, all the other county executives woke up to the realization that if the state can't do anything, none of us can do anything. None of us has authority for local taxes, as most counties do in many other states, including Virginia. So when the state has no money, we have no money, and it's really an impediment to being able to make progress. We've all seen it happen, and in Northern Virginia, where special tax districts have paved the way for the kind of transportation projects we desperately need here. Virginia started down this path about 12 years ago, and the legislature and the governor, Republican legislature, actually supported the request from the Fairfax County Council and the Board of Supervisors, as they call it, and the developers in the business community, who went together to the Republican legislature and the Republican governor and asked for and got local taxing authority, largely on commercial property, in order to build the transit they need to spur development. Their commercial taxes dwarf what Montgomery County receives, and the investments they made with that money spurred the development that everybody envies. They made deliberate decisions about tax policy that made it possible to attract businesses, because they could promise the infrastructure that developers saw in their master plans could be built, and built on time. That is something that we couldn't possibly do here. And the Purple Line is a poster child for that. But we cannot build, and we do not build the projects that sit in our master plans, because we have no way of guaranteeing when we're going to get the money and how much money we're going to get. And, you know, Virginia took their future in their hands. They made hard decisions. The development community understood that development of infrastructure would underlay the future development potential they saw, and they went ahead and acted on it. It's time for Montgomery County to do the same. And if we're going to drive economic development here, we have to provide infrastructure. I'm proposing, and I've proposed before, to ditch our impact tax system and replace it with tax structures used in Northern Virginia. By relying on revenue created by development partners, we can become more self-sufficient as a county. We would no longer be dependent on the state of our transportation needs for this, on the state for our transportation needs. And the longer we wait to complete the CIP projects, the more they cost. And when you delay a project by 12 years, the cost of that project has probably doubled, particularly in the inflation we've experienced during COVID. We've seen massive increases in costs. And if we had done this when it should have been done, we wouldn't be having to deal with these higher costs now. And by relying on more development partners, we become more self-sufficient. The county is faced with, I think, a really serious choice here. I know the other county executives are supporting the legislative effort to get local taxing authority. For the residents out there, this is not a taxing authority on houses. We're not interested in going after the housing and residents of the county. This is really focused on development in the county. They will be the primary benefit of the opportunities to take 3-story buildings and turn them into 20-story buildings. So it makes sense to focus the costs there. And it's better for them than the impact taxes because it actually reduces the cost of the projects they have to build in Montgomery County. So it's good for the development community, and it is good for Montgomery County, and it puts us in a position where we can actually build the things that we promised people we're going to build. And I want to remind everybody that inside my capital budget, as you'll see in greater detail as we roll this stuff out, that everything competes in the capital budget. So schools compete with transportation. And you'll see a list of projects we cut in order to fit our needs into what we had in terms of resources. And you can see by the list of projects what we're not able to do because we don't have the resources to do it. And we need to get out of this issue. And I think there's a way forward, and hopefully working with the council, we'll figure out a way to do it. I generally don't pay much attention to the comment sections of articles, but we did catch this response from someone named Crench on the post coverage of our CIP budget. And I want to point this out because it shows that there are actually people out there who understand our argument. Crench said that in Virginia, businesses pay higher taxes than Montgomery County. Virginia taxes commercial properties at a higher rate than homeowners. The developers don't mind because the extra taxes are dedicated to infrastructure such as buses, roads, transit. Maryland requires us to tax homeowners and businesses at the same rate. You don't have the ability to have a different rate for commercial than residential. If we get the state to change the law, then everyone wins. Homeowners get lower taxes, commercial pays more, but gets a reliable income stream for the infrastructure that they need to make the businesses profitable and have the ability to grow. So it's nice to see there are people out there who get what we're trying to do. The public can look over my budget proposal by visiting Montgomery County MD/OMB and clicking publications. The public can also offer feedback to the county council as they consider this proposal. First opportunity will be on Tuesday and Wednesday, February 6th and 7th, when the county holds public hearings on the CIP budget. This week, we got some great news from the state after getting bad news from the state a little over a month ago. This week, Maryland Governor Westmore announced a one-time addition to his proposed budget to help ease the pain of more than $3 billion in state transportation cuts over the next 6 years. Those cuts affect everything that didn't have a shovel in the ground. So there's a lot of projects that Montgomery County has that don't have shovels in the ground, and they're casualties of this. The $150 million restores some of the funding for projects slated for immediate work across Maryland through the highway user revenue funds, and for Montgomery County, $17 million will be back in the mix to pay for ride-on services and keep one of our DMV offices open that was likely to close once FY25 ends. If we weren't getting the $17 million back for Ride-On, we'd be faced with either finding the funds to replace it or cutting services. And so we can avoid both finding funds and cutting services. And I'm very happy about that. I want to thank the governor for making county needs a priority. We understand how fewer drivers on the roads over the last few years and less money spent on gas has impacted the transportation budget. Governor and his team clearly weighed the impact of severe cuts over the last month and decided to find more in the budget to help us. And I hope it's a sign that we can make progress over the next few months to address our state's physical shortcomings in a collaborative way to continue to serve as many Marylanders as possible. I'm going to pause for a moment and turn it over to Chris Conklin, our director of MC.Dot, and see if there are any comments he'd like to add to this on transportation issues.
Thank you, County Executive. I'd like to echo the comments you made about the restoration of the highway user revenue and lots funds that the governor has added to the transportation budget. That was our highest priority in addressing the proposed cuts to the consolidated transportation program. So that's excellent news. Just a couple of other notes on the bus rapid transit program. We are getting close to securing federal grant. We're in the application process for implementing a Veers Mill project and are working on finalizing a financing plan for the 355 project. So very pleased to see those recommendations in your recommended capital improvement program. And the last thing that I'll mention is just the winter operations and snow clearing operations. Our crews were largely finished with all of their work going into yesterday evening, and we moved into a inspection and spot treatment mode for areas that were identified as needing additional treatment, and all of that activity was wrapped up early this morning. So the county roads are in good shape. If there are any issues that people notice, they can look for information on the snow portal, which you can find on the Montgomery County website. They can identify whether your street is a county main street, a state maintained street, or maintained by one of the municipalities. If you find an issue on a county maintained street, please let 311 know. And also, as part of our salt management plan, if you find any excess salt on county roads, so piles of salt that were inadvertently dumped, please let us know, because we will be going around the county and collecting any salt on county roads that is above what is normal or needed to treat the icy conditions that existed earlier this week. And we ask everybody to be prepared for upcoming weather again that we're expecting later this week. So our crews are going to take a little breather, and thanks to Richard Dorsey, our Chief of Highway Operations, for managing this event well. We were caught a little bit off guard with the severity of the conditions on Sunday morning, but got right on top of it after we realized that the storm was a little bit more intense than thought, and overwhelmed some of the pre-treatment we had done in preparation for the snow on Sunday. But again, we're regearing and resetting and getting ready for the next winter weather. So thank you to everybody who contributed to that effort.
And Chris, are we on schedule for winter weather this weekend, unfortunately?
That's what I understand, is we're looking at more inclement weather Friday into the weekend.
Thank you.
I used to love snow, and I used to love snow days, but when you're sitting in the county and you realize 1 inch of snow is $1 million of an expenditure, you quickly lose your love of snow.
Thank you, Director Conklin. Mr. County Executive, we can continue with other topics, and we'll change in the format this week a little bit. We'll take all questions at the end.
Okay. Well, there's only one other topic, and that's the health report. And, obviously I have COVID again, and I attended MLK events all day on Monday. And by the end of the night, I started sneezing. I sneezed before, so I didn't think much of it, but I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, realizing I was more than sneezing. And I decided to test myself and discovered I was positive for COVID-19. So I called Kaiser. I got my Paxlovid. I've obviously not doing anything other than Zoom meetings, and this is not nearly as bad as my first round of COVID. I went through 2 days then when I would fall asleep almost instantly sometime in the middle of walking, and I would have to, as soon as I felt it coming on, I'd have to go find a chair. I'm not experiencing any of that right now, which is pretty good. This seems mild, but it's certainly not pleasant. I don't recommend it unless you've got a lot of time to kill and nothing to do. Maybe it's not that bad. As we discussed over the last few weeks, we're in the middle of the traditional cold and flu season. We also have COVID-19 now and other respiratory illnesses impacting our community. We have a brand new strain. It's actually not brand new, but the JN1, and it's the new dominant variant. It accounted for less than 5% of the cases 2 months ago. Now it's responsible for more than 60% of the cases. And symptoms of the JN1 strain are very similar to their previous Omicron variants, and it doesn't seem to cause a more severe disease either. Even though our current vaccine was released in September 23, it's still the best way to avoid serious complications from JN1. I encourage everyone to stay up to date on all vaccines that they're eligible for. And it's not too late to get COVID-19 vaccine or flu vaccine or an RSV vaccine to better protect yourself and your family. And if you do feel sick enough to visit a doctor, there are antivirals that are still effective against this new strain. So I'm counting on the antiviral to be effective. I'd like to invite our health team to comment about what we're seeing locally before turning it over to the media for questions. I'll start with Acting Deputy Chief of Public Health, Sean O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Just to share a little bit of data, as our county executive stated, we are in the middle of the respiratory season, flu, COVID, and RSV. Our county COVID hospitalizations are still very elevated, but it does look like this could be starting to plateau. When we're looking at our emergency department and urgent care visits, the upper graph is showing all visits with a respiratory diagnosis on discharge. And you can see after a high point of about 240 per day, we have been coming down over the last week for respiratory visits across the board. The COVID specific visits, as you can see in the lower chart, those are also starting to come down as well. So that's encouraging news, but they're still very elevated. A lot of people are still getting COVID, as you can see. For influenza, we're also starting to see that come down. And that was county numbers. Here's our state numbers. And you can see that, again, it looks like it's starting to come down. I will caution folks that in 2019, when we had a similar onset period, you saw that it did come down a little bit between December and January before going back up. So we'll continue to monitor this. We hope it continues to come down, but all of January and parts of February are indeed typical for these sorts of respiratory disease. Those are the updates we have for this week. Again, things look like they're starting to come down a little bit, but it's still very, very elevated. We encourage people to be cautious, particularly if they have weakened immune systems, or I know a lot of our seniors, their immune systems don't respond as quickly. So again, we're just urging caution when you're in crowded places, as COVID is definitely still spreading. At this point, I'd like to see if there are any additional comments from Dr. Davis or Dr. Bridgers from HHS.
None from me, Mr. O'Donnell.
I think you covered everything. The only thing I'll add is just a reminder that when folks are in clinical settings, if you do have to visit the doctor, whether it's for COVID or not, that we recommend that you wear a mask to protect yourself and others. And we will probably be seeing more of the clinical staff wearing those masks to protect themselves and patients as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stoddard. Do you have any opening remarks?
Yeah, I just want to add my thank you to the Department of Transportation and Department of General Service workers who were out, obviously, throughout the evening as the snow is coming down. We were telling people to stay in. They're out there doing the work to get the roads cleared and safe. And I just want to, we spend a lot of time thanking our first responders when we respond to a fire. I think it's also appropriate that we thank the other responders who come in and support the county when those things happen. So I just want to add my thank yous to those of Director Conklin, County Executive, for both general services, transportation, and others who come in and do that work when we need them to. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now we open it up for the Q&A portion of this presentation. I believe you, Kate Ryan, had your hand up first. Go ahead. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have to ask about snow clearing at the schools. And I know that's the school responsibility, but Mr. Conklin, I'd like you to weigh in. We contacted the school system about, you know, why they had to close and when other roads were open. The response we got from Chris Cram was that ice removal is far more time consuming than snow removal. The extreme cold temperatures made this a singular experience in terms of surface readiness. Mr. Conklin, can you weigh in on the difficulty of this past storm? And has there ever been a discussion to Mr. County Executive to have the county take over plowing the parking lots at schools and school properties and sidewalks? Please feel free, because we've been getting a lot of reaction.
Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, this was a challenging storm event. It's a little atypical around here that we have such extraordinary cold following snow and wet precipitation. So it is a little harder, as we've talked about in other events we've had around salt usage. If the snow is not removed right away and it's in these sorts of conditions, it does harden and is hard to remove. So I can't speak to any specific challenge that the school system might have had in ice removal. I know in our parking facilities, we are doing continuous operations at those facilities to keep them available during these events. But there were added challenges with this event with the nature of the storm and the extreme cold. In terms of support to the schools, when we have a request for aid for salt provision or other materials during these events, we are often assist with the availability of those materials. But our crews are completely busy clearing the 5,000 miles of county road and the several hundred miles of sidewalk that we're responsible for.
Do you have feelings or thoughts about whether or not that would be feasible to have the county take over, say, okay, we'll do the schools?
I think generally when you have multiple agencies responsible for their own area of snow removal, it tends to go a little bit better than when you have all of that activity consolidated into one large organization. You have examples of other jurisdictions like North Carolina and Virginia nearby, and oftentimes it's harder to get the entirety of the network cleared when you have one agency responsible for everything. That doesn't mean there aren't advantages to those models too for other reasons, but I've seen in my experience in this realm, when you have more agencies responsible for their own piece of the network, the work happens a little bit more effectively.
Got you. And then a different topic, if I can, about flooding and flood control. In the budget, Mr. Elrich, you talked about flooding and flood control. Can you give me an example of where we're seeing it at a level that we didn't before? There are several spots I can think of that whenever my news agency says go out and find flooding, I know exactly where to go. But I agree. I think you're seeing it in more spaces. But can you give us a for example?
Oh, but for example, it's kind of like in my backyard, Sligo Creek Park, which is going to be very difficult to deal with because Sligo Creek absorbs all the flow from northern Montgomery County. So you're not going to fix it.
Mr. County Executive, you have your camera off, I believe. There you go. We see you now.
You can still hear me. So it's so I'm saying, you know, Sligo Creek's one of these really challenging places because the flow in Sligo Creek is generated by a massive drainage system that extends up county, but it does close. And so I've seen the waters over the parkway and the parkway winds up closed. We've had problems on River Road. We've got problems in neighborhoods that have never had major flooding before. We're dealing with homes that are being impacted, streams going so far out of the banks that the water is actually impacting houses. And these aren't houses that are built right next to the stream. So we're getting a lot of requests for people to come and fix their stormwater problem. And I think what we discovered initially was the problem appears to be in the middle of your street, but there's nothing that you're going to do in the middle at that interceptor there or that sewer that's not flowing without dealing with how much volume is coming into the sewer from above it and how large the system is to move water below it. And I was driving down a couple of streets, which was really remarkable, where it was raining and not raining, stuff was melting, but water was coming out of the sewer and onto the street, which means that so much was in the pipes that it backed up, filled the chamber there, and was then pumping itself out on the street instead of flowing downstream. So we've got these problems all over the county. We know we've got to deal with it. It is not going to be cheap, and it's the reason why we decided to hire a firm that actually assesses the hydrology and looks at the entire system, because we don't want to waste money on a fix in one place and just discover that it wasn't enough because the next big storm overwhelms the system again. So we're working on it, and a lot of the money in there is going to go to projects. You know, if Arlington County, for example, if you want the most extreme kind of thing, they built a underground, I would like to call it a pond or a swimming pool, but it's the size of a football field. And it takes water from part of their stormwater system and it holds it in there. And then they can release it over time so it doesn't overwhelm the storm system, where if all that water was coming out in real time, the system would be overwhelmed. Those are the kind of things we're going to be looking at. And I guarantee you, the moment we dig up a ball field and build a giant concrete basin under it, it is not going to be cheap. So that's the kind of project we're facing. We hope there's some climate money to deal with this, because there's clearly an impact to climate change. And, you know, this is part of our effort to get money out of the federal government. We're hoping the state is willing to put some money into this, because this is bigger than us if we're dealing with state roads. They're a big contributor to the lack of adequate infrastructure. So we're going to have to pull as many partners together into this.
Thank you. And again, your thoughts on the snow performance on the school?
So I don't know what their protocols were. I mean, I don't know if Chris has talked to them, but I'd ask them how they handled those parking lots between the beginning of the evening and the following morning, and how that compares with what we did. I mean, were our policies in managing these lots, are they better policies in terms of ensuring that they're available? And did the school system just not do what we did? And maybe they need to do what we did if they can't get the lots open in the morning. It was a very late call this morning. And maybe if it had been made more timely, it would have been less irritating. But making the call at 7:45 or something like that, that is way too late to tell people. I don't know how you'd make any arrangements for your kids, for example. It's just, they could have been handled better, probably.
Thank you. And I'll I know Tom and Ginny are ready to go. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Kate. Tom Fitzgerald for Fox 5 DC. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me participate in Kate's briefing this morning.
It's been the same if you had gone first.
Yeah, it's true. I do want to revisit this thing with the schools, because we did go out and talk to a lot of parents who just echoed what you just said, that they weren't just being cranky about this, that it really put a lot of people into a jam because of childcare issues this morning. You've already answered, Mr. Compliment answered the question about the roads. You just answered the question about your reaction. Let me take this in a different direction, the way forward here. We've got another storm coming on Friday. Is there a conversation to be had here and understanding the delineation of the responsibilities between the county and the school system? There is a limit to how you can affect this, but is there a phone call coming? Is there a conversation coming? How do you have this conversation? I'm going
to reiterate what I said before. I think Chris should talk to their people and see what they did and see if we can give them any guidance about what they could do that would produce a better outcome. And we could talk about, we use not only our own people, we've got 200 contractors out there. I don't know what our dependence was on contractors in the later stages of the morning or the later stages of the evening before, or I guess the early morning. If we had been able to relieve some of our contractors because we were in good shape to help the schools, if they had asked us, that would have been maybe a possibility. But I don't know what our status was early, so I don't know whether we would have had any flexibility.
And just let me follow up something quickly that you and I spoke about in Annapolis last week. The governor this morning unveiling his budget plan. Have you gotten any read yet from Annapolis on the outlook here? I mean, $770 million gap. Obviously, the transportation challenges. There's a lot on the table here, and the governor says this is going to be a budget of hard choices.
Yeah, yes, it is. I've looked at it. I don't have any words of, wisdom, because unless they're willing to raise revenues, which has always been an allergy, then it's really going to be different. And I think at some point people have to define, are we going to be defined by our tax rates? Are we so loyal to the tax rate that we don't care what services we provide people, or are we willing to look at tax rates sometimes? There's a fair tax coalition out there that has a list of taxes that would not impact residents that could be put in place. We should probably think about some of that. We should think about combined reporting. We should certainly think about I forget what the number was this year, but there's some large number of huge corporations that pay no taxes here. That's ludicrous. And, we ought to defend ourselves as best we can and figure out how to fix it. But frankly, this is a discussion at a national level. We're not the only ones struggling to try to figure out how we pay for the things that people want us to do. My budget doesn't even nearly reflect the reasonable requests that people made for things that we're not able to completely fulfill. And as long as we're going to have large corporations paying their taxes, it's always going to lead to an unequal taxing system. And if I'm a resident and I'm looking at people who pay nothing and thinking like, I get dinged for everything and they get dinged for nothing, why do we tolerate it? I don't know why we tolerate it personally, because I wouldn't.
Thank you, Tom. Up next, Jeannie Bixby, Local 360. Good afternoon, Jeannie.
Good afternoon, Lorna. Hi, Mark. I have a question kind of in a totally different realm. Some of the local Republicans have been giving the county government some flack after a Washington Times story came out about the MoCo Comic Con, and I'm probably I know it's like something cutesier than that, but the MoCo Comic Con allegedly having different rates for minority vendors. And some of these critics are alleging that this violates county law. But it's a little tricky even for me reading into it, because I know that this is an event hosted by the Friends of the Library, which is private, but it's also hosted at the library. Could you give a little bit more insight into is this a violation? What does this mean?
So Ginny, you have to send me what they've put out. I haven't seen anything. This is the first I've heard about this. They're saying that who gets charged different rates?
Minority businesses.
But that would be if they're doing it. I can't see how that's not illegal. So that would, we're pretty clear that we don't have different rates for different races. That is, so old school. We're well past that day. If it's happening, I need to see what it is. And if it even looks like that, I'll make sure this gets adjusted. But there's no way, I can't believe it. Send me the information. And next week, I'll you can ask me and I'll tell you where I went with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jeannie, members of the media, any other questions for the county executive and the other officials? Questions? Going once, going twice. I guess we're done for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe. Have a great afternoon. And Mr. County Executive, I hope you feel better.
That's my plan.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, take care.